some people say.
So, 100 years ago, somebody would have a heart attack. They do an autopsy. They, cut open their arteries and discover, oh my gosh, it's clogged, and what is this? Oh, it's cholesterol and calcium, and so you can understand why they thought cholesterol was doing the damage. When someone has a clogged artery, what has happened? What's going on there?
Okay, so the process is that basically the whole thing is about atherosclerosis, which is an inflammatory disease of your artery wall. The wall does build up crud within it, and eventually when a plaque, which is an atheroma or a plaque, it's like a scab in your artery wall that gets larger and larger, and it's full of like dead tissue and some cholesterol crystals and smooth muscle cells and immune system components. Your body's like fighting an infection in that little thing. And if it gets big enough and weak enough, it can just rupture. And the rupture allows the core of the plaque to spill out, and that causes a sudden blockage. Your blood clots, you get a heart attack. So that's the atheroma, right? And some people will have almost none of these at, say, age 50. And some people will have hundreds of them all over their coronary vessels. So the million-dollar question is, well, what drives it? Right. What drives you to have more? And the main things that drive it are hyperglycemia, high blood glucose, diabetes, many pathways to driving that bad process. Hyperinsulinemia, insulin, many papers showing how insulin drives plaque formation, right? Smoking, great example. It damages your LDLs and causes them to be really problematic. And we could go on and on. Stress, sleep, loads of different causes. Heavy metal contamination can drive atherosclerosis. So I have a good diagram that you might link to in the notes, but it just shows all the causes, most of the big ones. And absolutely. The question is, cholesterol, how much does natural native LDL particles, undamaged in a healthy person, how much did they on their own drive the problem? And the answer is, I would say, very little. Yeah.
Okay. So you would agree that cardiovascular disease is primarily an inflammatory disease, that if you reduce systemic inflammation, you will probably reduce your rate of cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, I think endothelial stress, the inner lining of your artery wall, if you can remove inflammation and damage to your endothelial lining, and you can lower inflammation and all the other causes, then the LDL particles being healthy will flow in your blood without causing a problem. For LDL to be a problem, you need to have other real problems going on. That would be my simplest message. And
yeah.
Just one last thing. Sure. If you have other real problems going on that are causing your blood vessels to be inflamed or damaging the lining or any of these things, well then if you lower the number of cholesterol particles in your blood, it may slow down the process of atherosclerosis. But that doesn't mean that the LDL, natural native LDL, are causing it the vast majority of the time. But people get confused sometimes because they know that if you lower the number of particles with drugs, it helps. And it helps because you're taking away a lot of damaged particles, etc. But it's not to be confused with the real causes of what's damaging your arteries.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to note, I have a post on my site that I kind of update every once in a while, is like extreme athletes, people who are the in the tip top physical shape, who have 99% blockages in an artery or type 2 diabetes or whatever. And because I'm trying to make the point, these people are eating a very high carb diet. They're eating a lot of sugar because that's what they've been taught to do. They've been, that you need to eat a lot of carbohydrates to function at the highest level. But all of their cardiovascular work doesn't prevent them from having cardiovascular disease. And I think that's an important point, that it's just, I equate it to a car that if you rev it at top speed like these athletes are doing, but you don't have any oil in the in the crankcase, it's gonna blow up eventually. And that's what they're doing. They're taking the oil out. They've inflamed their body with all these carbohydrates, and then they've run it at this really high level of athletic performance, and things are blowing up. There people are having heart attacks, type 2 diabetes, all of these really crazy stuff. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, we certainly have in many papers published. It's a great point. I think in a sense, these exceptional athletes, all of their exercise is doing them a lot of good in one way,
yeah,
but burning massive amounts of glucose flash fuel, which I call it, through the electron transport chain in your body's, energy generation systems. Burning a lot of glucose is causing a lot of knock-on inflammatory effects. So they've kind of got one advantage, one big disadvantage, and they end up with the same amount of atherosclerosis, roughly, as the average person. Now, recently, the way to measure atherosclerosis and find out your risk at middle age is the coronary calcification scan.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about that. So yeah, please go into that.
Well, yeah, it just comes up here perfectly, and it's the most important takeaway. At middle age, if you go in and get a quick 5-minute CT scan for a CAC score, it's called, it's only around $100 in the States, and you don't need a doctor in many states to give you a letter to get it. So you guys are in great shape there compared to Europe. But you get an instant result, a score, anything from 0 at middle age up to the thousands. And that can tell you your future chance of a heart attack, because it measures the calcium in the arteries. That's a repair process for atherosclerosis. So the more calcium, the more inflammation you've been driving for years. Mm-hmm. So a very high scoring person could have 20 or more times the risk of a future heart attack than a 0 person at middle age. Now, we recently scanned 52 people who were sportsmen, massive sportsmen from the 90s, and we got the results. And roughly they did the same amount of calcification as average people. And we got people in there, maybe half of them have 0s, and then you've got 10s, 30s, 60s, 100s, and people with thousands in the calcium scan. And they're huge risk, and we're getting them looked after now. But the blood tests didn't tell us anything, pretty much. In fact, Aaron, and this is interesting, we did all their bloods, and the only bloods that gave any indication of who was a high score in the scan, in this perfect scan, mm-hmm. their total over their HDL ratio, their triglyceride over their HDL, and their blood glucose A1Cs. They were the only 3 measures. And you know what? Out of 50 people, the LDL had 0 correlation with the calcification result, whether it was 0 or it was 3,000.
And when I had my blood test 5 years ago, that was the only number that my doctor was concerned with. Yeah. And it doesn't correlate. It's frustrating. I do want to, before we leave the calcium scan, I do want to just mention, I saw your, it wasn't yours. I saw the, was it The Widowmaker? Is that the name of it? The documentary on it? Yeah, that's available now. I can send you a link to YouTube. You can just watch it direct. The short version with I paid 99 cents for it. So no, it was good. It was great. It was wonderful. And I recommend people check that out. When you're doing a calcium scan, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've got calcium building up on your artery walls, and then over time that cholesterol gets I guess inundated with calcium and becomes more rigid, becomes hard. So when you're doing a calcium scan, you're looking at older patches of buildup. Is that correct? Exactly, Aaron. You are seeing your history up to the day of the scan. Okay. And that's why it predicts so well, because if you get a score that's very high, it means you were driving a ton of disease for years. So you're at huge risk. So it's not so much the old, hard, calcified plaque that rupture.
it's often more soft plaque with less calcium that actually can rupture and cause a heart attack. But the
Okay.
beauty is the calcium is the tip of the iceberg, the canary in the coal mine. So if you have zero calcium at middle age, it means there's very little soft plaque and there's not much has gone on. So you're really low risk. But if you have very high calcium, it means there's a massive amount of soft plaque, of which some of it has now calcified. And it tells you, wow, you have a ton of soft plaque and fibrous plaque and all kinds of plaque in your body. You've been driving disease, boy. And that's why it predicts the future heart attacks so amazingly. But
So,
there's just one key thing, we might get onto it. It's not all bad news when you get a really high score, because crucially you can step in, take action, and stop that score progressing or increasing over the following few years. And if you have gone, say, from a 0 score to 1,000 score over 5, 6, 7 years, let's say, well, if you can keep that 1,000 only going up to 1,020, 1,060 over the next few years, you stop the progression, your risk goes back nearly to a person who had a 0.
oh, that's
Once you
interesting.
stop, yeah, it's not just the amount of disease you have that predicts the future. It's you keep on driving it like you were. That's the assumption. But if you stop it and you get a calcium scan in 2 years and say you're 1,000 and you're only around 1,100 2 years later, or 1,060, you slowed it down, your risk can start dropping like a stone. And that's why it's so crucial people get a scan result if they're middle risk to find out what's going on.
Yeah, my stepfather a couple years ago passed out in the yard. He was mowing the grass, just passed out, and they took him to go look and find out what was going on. And said that his like it could not have been his carotid. He said carotid. There's no way it could have been a carotid, but he said like one of the major veins in his neck had gotten so calcified that it was essentially shut down, and the body had built a like a bypass around his clog. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are you
Yeah.
doing? And of course now he's on the statin. Now he's eating almost a vegetarian type. It's
Uh,
maddening to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I wish that somebody would put him in a calcium scan and at least track this number, so that he could figure out exactly what it is that he's doing. But his doctor doesn't even know about it.
no, the history is shown in the Widowmaker movie. And if people Google Widowmaker CAC, that's 2 words, Widowmaker CAC, you'll hit it on YouTube and you can watch it. It tells the story of why it was suppressed for 30 or 40 years.
Right.
Fascinating story, but we won't get into that here. But now there's really good news. So in 2012, the calcium scan got into the guidelines. And now in 2018, just a few weeks ago, it's now been enshrined as level 2A evidence.
Oh, okay.
And for middle risk people, it is now guideline to be used for statin medication decisions. In other words, if you're very high risk, which are bloods, in fairness, you don't need a scan. You have high risk, really high risk bloods, you got a problem.
Right.
If you're very, very low risk, you're probably okay. You might not need a scan. But most people in the world are in middle risk, and you don't know what the hell's going on with them. And now you can go in for the middle risk, get a scan. If you get a 0, you don't need medication, because they know if you have a 0 CAC score, you won't even get any benefit from the medication over 10 years. And if you're a high score in the scan, in fairness, the medications can help high scoring diseased people. Okay. So at least the right people will be getting some of the benefit.
So very quickly, just to change subject a little bit, in the last few years, you have kind of joined up with Jeffrey Gerber. You guys have written a book. I know I actually haven't read the book yet. I think it's over here. I've got like 6 in front of it I need to read. But you've got in this book 10 levers that you're trying to kind of highlight as ways that people can change their health. Just very quickly, what are these 10 levers, and what is it that people need to do to maximize their health?
Yeah, well, exactly, Aaron. We tried to keep a simple kind of set of 10 kind of thing, rather, because there's a million other things you can do, and we deal with them in the book,
Right.
but to keep it simple. So you eliminate refined carbohydrates, eliminate vegetable oils, industrial seed oils that are pushed on us, and eliminate processed food that contains both. So that's kind of 3 elimination rules. And sugar, of course, is in there. It's the ultimate
Right.
refined carb. So you pretty much take them out. Then you go on a high healthy fats, low carb, moderate protein diet. I know we can argue about the percentages, but go on a healthy diet like that. The other one is there's a 3 together, the 3 S's: sun, sleep, and stress. So stress management, as much as you can do of it. Get healthy sun exposure, or there are UV lamps available, and sun, stress, and sleep. Lack of sleep drives up cortisol, insulin, and causes many issues. Then there's supplements. We go through a lot of supplements in the book, but there's a few key ones: magnesium, potassium, maybe fish oil or cod liver oil. And then stress training exercise, ideally press ups, squats, lift ups. You don't need to run around for hours, do that kind of stress training. So I think from memory, I'm not sure I covered all 10, but it was, if you could follow those 10 reasonably, you'd be way ahead of the next guys. Yeah. I mean, you'd be miles ahead of most of your compatriots in America. And your risk would be plummeting if you just did that.
And what was the name of the book?
Eat Rich, Live Long. Okay. So we've got a couple of hundred reviews on Amazon, and we're average 5 stars out of 5. So we put the work in.
Well, we're going to put a link to that in the show notes. Can you tell my listeners if they'd like to kind of follow you and find out what you're about, your social media, where they can go to figure out who you are and what you're about?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the easiest ways is Google Ivor Cummins, my name, or Google Fat Emperor, which is my nickname. So I'm on Twitter at Fat Emperor. I have thefatemperor.com. I'm on Facebook as Fat Emperor. But if you Google my name, you'll get all the hits very quickly. And YouTube, I do a lot of free lectures. I released 2 more lectures from Mallorca just in the last few days, and they're getting big viewing numbers, and I think they're really, really good. You'll learn a lot in 2 30-minute lectures if you watch those 2.
Fantastic. We're going to put links to all of that in the show notes. Ivor, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. It's great to be back. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. And those of you that are listening, hold on. We'll be right back with some more information.